All right. Good evening, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Just running into some Mac PC issues. Thank you all for coming tonight. I had some remarks prepared that said thanks for coming out in the middle of this blizzard, but I don't know who's forecasting the weather these days. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We have two distinguished guests here this evening, former Governor of Colorado, Richard Lamb, and the President of the Vail Valley Foundation, Seal Foles. We're very excited for their talk this evening. But before they come up and speak to you, we'll be unveiling the 2013 State of the Rockies report card. And before I do that, I'll just briefly touch on a few points regarding the Rockies project. We're very excited to be celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. 10 years ago, Walt Hecox and Patrick Holmes founded the Rockies project and put in place sort of a simple motto of research, report, engage. And we've really tried to stick to this as much as we can over the last few years. The research has involved everything from work here on campus, mining through data, looking through census numbers. But some of the most valuable experiences have come in the field. A few of these photos have covered the last 2 years of the Rockies Project field research, where we focused on the Colorado River Basin. Each year we've published our annual State of the Rockies report card. This year we'll be momentarily actually releasing our 10th Rockies report card. I'd like to take a second to thank Steve Weaver, the Geology Department, who not only has graciously contributed a photo for each one of the Rockies report cards, but also just ran across campus to pick up his Mac. So thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. And the third aspect of our motto, engage, is something we've really been considering a lot more in the past few years. How do we want to engage Rockies residents? And, you know, how do we get our information out there and get our reports and all the research we're doing? How do we get it out there so it actually has an effect on the Rockies community? We've had some interesting experiences over the last 2 years. Last year we had Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar come and speak at the annual State of the Rockies conference. We've held an annual speaker series for the last few years. And just the past 2 years we've incorporated an expedition aspect to the Rockies project that has sought to tie people back to some of the wild places, the few wild places left out there in the Rockies region, and meant to give them a better sense of their place here in the Rockies region. And as I mentioned this evening, we'll be releasing the 2013 State of the Rockies report card, the title of which is Water-Friendly Futures for the Colorado River Basin. And the report cards are on sale outside, but they'll also be available on the web for the next day or two. So if anyone's interested, you should certainly look through the report. And without further ado, I'm actually going to turn it over to some of our student researchers to discuss their research from this summer.
In our section, Agriculture Water Use in the Colorado River Basin, Conservation and Efficiency Tools for Water-Friendly Future, we focused on innovative and creative ways in which agriculture can be sustained throughout the basin as population growth and a rapidly changing climate further stress water availability. Our section investigated current water-efficient technologies, crop management, barriers to implementation, and water-sharing strategies in the region. Some of our key findings were as follows. After investigating the potential of irrigation-efficient technology, we determined that these strategies, although very valuable, will fail to offer a simple solution to water conservation in agriculture. As we investigated water-sharing strategies, we determined that alternative transfer methods must play a crucial role in meeting the competitive needs of urban, environmental, energy, and recreational uses in the basin. And finally, as we turn toward a water-friendly future for the Colorado River Basin, we must understand the limits of current water law and look towards a more flexible water rights regime, as well as a social shift among stakeholders from a past of conflict to a future of collaboration.
Thanks, Alice. So this past summer, we were fortunate enough to travel to Colorado State University, one of their research facilities, and talked with them and talked about the Colorado Water Institute. We also visited a USDA agricultural research service operation that focused on different water management strategies. And we're also fortunate enough on our 2-week field trip to travel to the Western Slope and talk about some of the different water efficiency programs that have been supported by USDA's NRCS. And we were also able to view this state-of-the-art irrigation pump apparently donated to the NRCS by Dr. Seuss. Yeah. So some of our recommendations were that we should transcend water use misconceptions in the basin. Farmers know what they're doing, and they're not wasting water. They provide valuable products and ecosystem services to the basin, and also these irrigation efficiency strategies do not necessarily affect the quantity of water used on farms. Rather, they tend to increase water quality in the runoff. Also, we urge stakeholders to seek cooperation. We've seen examples of this throughout the basin, and we need to see these efforts supported and lauded. Also, these issues are complex. We need to keep in mind that sometimes harmful outcomes can come from rash decision-making, and we need only look to some counties in southeastern Colorado for examples of this. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Shannon Thomas, who is a fellow student researcher.
So Matt and I focused on municipal and industrial water use in the Colorado River Basin, moving towards a paradigm shift in water reclamation. And just to give some background and context to this problem, the Colorado River supplies water to more than 30 million people, and this is projected to nearly double in 50 years to approximately 62 million. So obviously this is going to create a huge increase in water demand, so how we're going to meet that demand is a huge problem. And some have proposed supply enhancements to meet that need, which would be pipelines, but we don't really see this as the best option because it's really taking drastic measures that are irreversible. Rather, you should take alternative methods, namely conservation, to fix these problems. And so during our summer research and in the field, we actually conducted 2 case studies, one on the Front Range, which included Fort Collins, Denver, Aurora, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo, and another on the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is Las Vegas, and surprisingly, they have one of the most aggressive conservation programs in the entire West. And so what we really found is that there are effective and ineffective strategies, and you can look at these examples to see what maybe, if you're a water provider, what you should do in your own city. But really it focuses on your demographics and your customer preference. So you're going to have a different conservation program depending on that. So for example, Pueblo, who has an aging population and senior water rights, will have a huge different program compared to Aurora with a more youthful population and junior water rights. And so looking towards the future, we really think that education should be the primary goal of the conservation for municipal and industrial use. There really needs to be cooperation between consumers and water providers that goes both ways. So water providers need to provide information and education to their consumers, but they also need to gather information and preferences from their consumers to see what is really working. But essentially it comes down to the sacrifices that people are willing to make, and overall that's going to benefit the system and provide for future generations. So now we'll focus it on energy use.
Good evening. I'm Henry Matson.
And I'm Audrey Burns.
This summer, Audrey and I researched the energy-water nexus in the Colorado River Basin. We have a few key findings that we'd like to share with you. So around 2% of the water consumed in the basin goes to generate electricity. This 2% represents about 300,000 acre-feet. 300,000 acre-feet is the amount of water that Nevada needs an entire year for all of their water needs.
We also researched the water consumptiveness of various methods of electricity generation in the Colorado River Basin. We found that coal technologies with wet recirculating cooling are the most water-consumptive technologies for electricity generation. On the opposite end of the spectrum, wind and solar photovoltaics are the least water-consumptive, requiring only water to wash the turbines and solar panels.
This summer, we took our research to the field to view some of these power plants firsthand. We visited a natural gas directional hydraulic fracturing rig near Rifle, Colorado. With this natural gas rig, as with many others, the main concern for surrounding communities is the quality of the groundwater.
These silver panels are concentrating solar plant parabolic mirror troughs at a concentrating solar power plant in Boulder City, Nevada, which we visited on the field trip this summer. Concentrating solar power is an up-and-coming technology in the Colorado River Basin, particularly prevalent in southeastern California. This plant uses wet recirculating cooling, which is water consumptive relative to concentrating solar power technologies, but much less water consumptive when compared to coal and natural gas and nuclear plants using wet recirculating cooling.
Put together a few recommendations to share with you. One of the easiest recommendations would be a switch from coal to natural gas. Natural gas plants consume about half the water and emit about half the pollution per unit of electricity generated. This is an easy strategy because not much has to be changed about a coal plant to allow it to burn natural gas.
We also, another one of our main recommendations is that we enact a slow transition to the more efficient renewable energy. Cooperation between states is a move that must be delved into more deeply for this to take place. Various states have varying renewable energy potential, such as Arizona having really strong solar potential and Wyoming having really strong wind potential. So by combining forces, all of the basin states can experience mutual benefit. A method in place that's already starting to increase renewable energy in the basin is that of renewable portfolio standards. These are state pieces of legislation which require utilities in a state to generate a certain amount of their electricity from renewable energy by a certain year. And almost all the basin states have an RPS. So thank you. That about sums up our research for the report card this past summer.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to turn the podium over to Colorado College's own president, Jill Tiefenthaler, to award the 2013 Champion of the Rockies Award.
Good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight. I want to thank Brendan Bopel and Walt Hecox for their efforts in organizing yet another successful State of the Rockies conference. Professor Hecox has shepherded this project from its beginning to being a recognized program that serves as an intellectual sandbox for the study of critical issues affecting the Rockies region. I also want to thank our conference panelists and speakers for taking time out of their schedules to be with us. This Rockies conference is particularly special as it marks a decade of this program, championing the environmental issues of our time. In its 10 years of existence, the program has nurtured about 50 students, like we heard from tonight, whose passions are devoted to the ecological topics of the Rocky Mountain West and beyond. Since 2007, this program has also presented the Champion of the Rockies. This is an award to leaders of vision, drive, and determination whose efforts are positively shaping the Rocky Mountain region, present and future. Previous recipients of the award include Ted Turner, Ed and Betsy Marston of the High Country News, Terry Tempest Williams, and Secretary of Interior Ken Salazar. Our distinguished honoree and keynote speaker tonight is the Honorable former Colorado Governor Richard D. Lamb. Governor Lamb is not new to the Rockies Project. In 2004, our inaugural year, he gave a talk entitled The Angry West Revisited. Governor Lamb graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. After holding jobs as accountant, tax clerk, and law clerk, he attended law school at the University of California. In 1962, Governor Lamb moved to Denver and quickly took up Colorado hobbies, becoming an avid skier, hiker, mountain climber, and joining the Colorado Mountain Club. Around the same time, Governor Lamb became involved in an even tougher sport, Colorado politics. In 1966, he was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives, where he served until 1974. One of the defining moments of Governor Lamb's tenure in the Colorado Assembly was his leadership in the movement against Denver hosting the 1976 Winter Olympics. Raising the issue of the negative impact the Games would have on the environment, Governor Lamb's movement succeeded in cutting off public funding, forcing the city to cancel its hosting of the Games. After this success in 1974, Mr. Lamb ran for and was elected governor of Colorado. Throughout his tenure, Governor Lamb placed emphasis on environmental issues. Since leaving the governor's office in 1987, Governor Lamb has remained civically engaged, writing and teaching. Currently, he is co-director of the University of Denver's Institute for Public Policy Studies. Governor Lamb has received numerous awards and honors, including, I think the best one, an honorary doctorate from Colorado College in 1988. Tonight, we recognize Governor Richard D. Lamb's achievements by presenting him with the 2013 Colorado College Champion of the Rockies Award, which recognizes a lifetime of principled dedication to Colorado's land, water, environment, and people through extensive public service. Governor Lamb, could you please join us on stage? You're a great role model for our students in your distinguished career in politics, dedication to teaching, and willingness to stand up for environmental issues all serve as inspiration to generations of students and make you our champion of the Rockies. As a token of our esteem, we present you with a picture of the Elk Range in Colorado taken by Steve Weaver, Technical Director in the CC Geology Department. The caption on the picture reads, "Former Governor Richard D. Lamb, named 2012-2013 Champion of the Rockies in recognition of your exemplary public service to people and natural resources," presented by Colorado College, April 9th, 2013. Congratulations.
Madam President, thank you for your leadership and your excellence. Walt Hecox, how can we ever thank you enough for your vision and your determination to see this through and your tenacity. A special hello to my friend of 35 years, Tom Cronin. And ladies and gentlemen, what I shall do tonight is I'm going to give you a movie review. I'm going to end with 2 book reviews. And in the middle, I'm going to talk a little bit about the environment and the Olympics. The movie review. Sliding doors. Gwyneth Paltrow's running down to catch a subway, and the doors close right in front of her. And the movie takes her life half the movie. And then it goes back to that same scene, and she sticks her hand out. The doors open, and her whole life goes a different way. This haunts me. It haunts me in a lot of ways because I think sort of you could call it the serendipity or the capriciousness, or you could call it destiny, whatever you call it. But some of the young people in this room are, for an example, not going to want to go to a party. I don't want to go to the party. I don't want to go to the party. They go to the party and they meet the person they're going to share their life with. Or you meet just by accident somebody, and that leads you to a whole new career. I'm going to tie this in a minute to the Olympics. So how do you change public policy? Well, you do it in a number of ways, and there's no one way. One is legislative. You can file a lawsuit. You can do an initiative. You can do protests, executive action. And don't forget the power of the written word. I love the statement that John Stuart Mill changed the world more with his pen than Napoleon did with his sword. So simplistically, but meaningfully to me, you know, the first process is no talk, no do. And I use the women's movement as an example, but the environmental movement, almost the civil rights movement, whatever else it is. I grew up in the 50s. We knew that it was a man's world. we knew that women were slightly challenged. This is an actual ad from my generation. I heard that. How about this one? You're spanking your wife because she didn't serve you Chasen Sanborn coffee. It was truly a man's world, and nobody was talking about it. Well, the second stage, not surprisingly, is talk, no do. All of a sudden, here comes Betty Friedan. She writes a book. And all of a sudden, my wife goes out to consciousness-raising sessions. And women are applying to law school. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We weren't doing anything about it, but we were talking about it. They were talking about it. The next stage is talk, no do. Here they come. The consciousness-raising, the applying to law school, the statement that we're as good as you guys. Gloria Steinem, the incredible movement that happened and changed our society so much. Well, I'm going to surprise you. The last stage is no talk, just do. And it does interest me that this idea, how does society change? Well, it starts off with a conversation. It starts off with some audacious person raising an issue. I came to Colorado Station in Fort Carson in 1958. I moved here permanently at the end of 1961. And I was a product, as we all are, of our times. I was immensely influenced by John F. Kennedy. I got involved in the environmental movement. The first time I entered the Colorado legislature was as an unpaid lobbyist for the Colorado Mountain Clubs fighting billboards. I went back to Washington for the Colorado Mountain Club and testified for the Wilderness Act against the dams in the Grand Canyon. I've been passionate about this problem of land use, the challenge of land use planning. And of course, very active in Earth Day. So as these movements start and they reach this crescendo, or they develop, that so also does our society change. And we see it in so many different issues around us. So I was lucky enough to participate in changing the system in a number of different ways. In the legislature, I passed some major legislation, even though I served as only a minority member of the Colorado legislature, something, by the way, you can't do anymore. Unfortunately, the majority party, whoever it is, doesn't allow anybody to get any air of the other party. I filed a number of lawsuits, the most successful of which is to save Florissant National Monument. 3 of us. I don't want to take all the credit myself. There's a little brass plaque down there thanking us because we filed sort of a Hail Mary lawsuit to stop some bulldozers that were about to wipe out millions of years of fossils. The initiative, the Olympics, more about that later. Protest. My wife, Dottie, who's in the room, represented us in the March in Selma. I had a trial at the last minute, but we've been involved in a number of protests. Executive action, a number of things, and I've written a couple of books. So how do you change public policy? What are the elements of it? Well, I think this is Baron von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. And he said a thing that just haunts me. He says, success is the child of audacity. Success is the child of audacity. And I guess as I look back, giving due credit to sliding doors, just the capriciousness of the time that I came of age, but also I was an audacious young man. So sliding doors and audacity, how does that put together to the Olympics? Well, in 1972, the Olympic battle. Really what it was is who was in favor of the Olympics. Well, the Olympics are a wonderful thing. I'd actually attended the Olympics in 1960 in Squaw Valley. The governor was in favor of it, the mayor was in favor of it, the legislature was in favor of it, every newspaper in the state was in favor of it, the business community was in favor of it, and public opinion was in favor of it. And, I hasten to add, I voted for a resolution inviting the Olympics in 1967. But sliding doors again, the capriciousness of fate. As I was moving out of the governor's mansion, I found a clipping that says, "Today's Newspaper Boy." It turns out by the Pittsburgh Gazette, I had 147 newspapers delivered, and its title was, "Wants to be a CPA." I was 12 years old. I had no idea what a CPA was. I wanted to be a CPA because my father was one. And I became a CPA. By the way, to some great price. I look at the kind of liberal education, the good liberal arts education you're getting here. I am so jealous. When I was studying cost accounting, you were studying philosophy and history. But nevertheless, because I was the only CPA in the legislature, I was appointed to the audit committee. And on the audit committee, I started looking at the figures. And all you had to do is look at the figures and recognize that Colorado was fiscally over its head. Squaw Valley, the cost of the value was 13 times what they estimated. Grenoble, France, that had just held the Winter Olympics, were left with $1 billion in debt. Sapporo, Japan, which was in the process of hosting the Winter Olympics, it was $1 billion. And so I took my, sort of like the wedding guest at the Ancient Mariner, I started saying to people, have you seen this? Do you understand what we're taking on? Because the state is sort of the insurer of last resort on the Olympics. And the power of a valid statistic, but well stated. And I pointed out, as I was converted myself to the fact that Colorado was over its head. The Olympics were wonderful, but Colorado was over its head. I pointed out the cost of the bobsled and the luge was 4 times the annual state appropriation for air and water pollution control. That the cost of the speed skating facility was 7 times the budget for handicapped children. That we had no idea, there's a luge run, and this was scheduled to be in Evergreen, right down through a whole bunch of private property. So all of a sudden, all of these other groups started forming, starting in Evergreen, who were saying, wait a minute, I don't want a luge run in my backyard. And they started looking at the weather statistics showing when the various events were supposedly being held. They wanted to hold as many events in the Front Range as possible because that's where the population was. Not a bad goal. It's just that it wasn't snow generally at that time of the year in that place. Other than that, it was fine. So how do you get a hearing? If Aldous Huxley says, all great truths begin as heresy. So how does a heretic get a hearing? Well, it sure wasn't the Denver Post. The Denver Post was absolutely jerking their knees with patriotism and saying, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to Colorado. But we had a wonderful newspaper person in Colorado, Mike Howard, who ran the Rocky Mountain News, and they were all in favor of the Olympics editorially, but they were honest newspaper people. And they listened to what we were saying. And there was only one other legislator that I could convince that this was a bad idea. But then all of a sudden, all these groups came along. People started looking at it. People started listening. The Rocky Mountain News gave me a platform to make my case. And we made a case. This came, of course, again, sliding doors. It came at the time when environment was reaching a crescendo. Don't Californicate Colorado was one of the more popular bumper stickers. Dottie and I took money out of our own pockets to run ads in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News raising the growth issue. We're already the 7th fastest growing state. Why do we want to expose ourselves to literally hundreds of millions of dollars in possible losses when we're already growing so fast we can hardly handle the growth? And why do we want all of this growth in the first place? Is this our vision of what Colorado is going to become? It's really hard to describe what Colorado Springs was like. There's a few people in the room that were there in 1958. What a wonderful little community it was. But now, every piece of property from south of Colorado Springs to Fort Collins has some property rights attached to its development, either a platting or a zoning change. It's going to be nothing but wall-to-wall cities all the way up to Fort Collins. Is that really what we want? So the Olympic battle was fought over costs and the environment and the quality of life in Colorado. We had a great debate. It was really, it was a magic time in my life, but it was, I think, a magic time in a lot of people's life. The defeat, this comes from a wonderful guy that wrote in Colorado History magazine. He said the defeat was caused by excessive costs and unreliable financial estimates offered by the DOC, burgeoning anti-growth sentiments, fear of adverse environmental effects, inept planning by the DOC, a well-conceived and executed campaign by the opponents of the games. So here's what I see to be the change in the environmental area since then. When we were early involved in Earth Day, it was local. We were really looking at local issues. Today, it's global. It's an incredible global issue. It only applied to development. You only could be green in developed countries. Today, it's the entire world. It was peripheral to business. Business didn't take the environment very seriously. But today, it's integral to business. Almost every major corporation has an environmental officer and environmental impact. It was largely aesthetic. We were concerned about the brown cloud in Denver and billboards and wilderness. But today, this is an issue of health and survival. It was very visible. When you had a brown cloud in Denver hanging over it, it was relatively easy to rally people. When you could take them down to the South Platte River and show them pollution coming out of pipes, it was very possible to rally people. But what these young people have to do, their generation, is to rally people around intangible threats, to have to think about things that are not immediate and requires some imagination and some education to really understand the full impact of what we're talking about, acid rain, whatever else it is. We could attack a few large sources, the Excel plant in Denver, actually public service at the time. Today it's multiple sources. It isn't them, it's us. It's all of us and our lifestyle and our cars. So it used to be corporations. You could always demonize a corporation. But that isn't fair now. What's really causing it is us, is the individual. When we were acting in the 70s, we could pass water pollution legislation, and you could see it change in front of your eyes. The water would get cleaner, the air would get cleaner. But now the challenge is to try to get people to make some level of sacrifice for a long-term effort, a long-term impact. Which then leads me to my book, 2 book reports. This one haunts me. It's called The Spirit of the Gene by Reg Morrison. And what his thesis is that, and it's depressing, but that we are being driven by genetic inheritance that comes from the time of the ice and the tiger and the bear. That we are genetically programmed to grow and to honor bigger and larger and growth. And that it is part of our genetic heritage, and that it's going to be awfully difficult to escape. 3% growth rate means a doubling rate of economic activity every 23 years. So that means by the end of the 21st century, we'll have used 16 times as many economic resources as humans have consumed since we came down from the trees. Do we really think that the whole world could have a standard of living even equal to Mexico or Thailand? Perhaps, but I am immensely doubtful. It seems to me this is the challenge of the young people in this room. How do we find a sustainable society? Humans will have to learn to tread more lightly on the earth, as somebody else said, which leads me to my last book report. It's called Millennial Momentum. My wife brought this book to my attention. Millennials, of course, are born between 1980 and 2002. It varies a little bit, but the authors of Millennial Momentum say that this generation has a rendezvous with destiny. There are now about 27 million more millennials alive than members of Generation X, and 17 million more than the baby boomers, and the gap will only grow. And so their thesis is that every 80 years, a real leadership generation, which faces overwhelming, if not gargantuan challenges, comes along. And it isn't necessarily, however bright and wonderful. We spent 2 hours this afternoon with a group of students. But the key thing in their thesis is that every generation has bright and able young people, but that every 80 years comes along this incredible challenge that really brings out paradigm changes, that you have an unforgettable generation because they're faced with unprecedented problems. So the authors say the first big challenge in this country's history was the American Revolution. And they had a generation that rose to the occasion. 80 years later, it's the Civil War. 80 years later, it's the New Deal. 80 years later is now. So less than 20% of the electorate were millennials in 2008, but in 2012, 6 out of every 10 millennials was eligible to vote. By 2020, they will represent 36% of the vote. Which path the United States ultimately takes will be determined by the millennial generation's willingness to engage in this vast civic endeavor to remake America and its institutions, and the willingness of the rest of us to follow their lead. We, the authors, remain convinced of the ability of America's youngest generation to be the country's next great generation. So go at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Lamb. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Seal Fulls. An Illinois native, Ms. Fulls earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in recreational administration. After moving to Vail Valley in 1982, Ms. Fulls worked for the Vail Metropolitan Recreational District, and in 1989 joined the Vail Valley Foundation, which is committed to providing leadership and athletic, cultural, education, and community-based endeavors to enhance and sustain the quality of life in the Vail Valley for its residents and guests. 2 years after joining the foundation, Ms. Fulls was promoted to Director of Operations and assumed the overall operational responsibilities for the foundation's athletic events, including the annual World Cup skiing and mountain bike competitions and the American Ski Classic. In 1994, Ms. Fulls was elevated to the role of Senior Vice President, taking over the reins of the 1999 World Alpine Ski Championships organizational effort, and also representing the foundation around the world at International Ski Federation and International Cycling Union meetings. 5 years later, Ms. Fulls was named to her current role as President of the Vail Valley Foundation. Her accomplishments include spearheading Vail and Beaver Creek's successful bid for the 2015 FIS Alpine World Ski Championships and serving as president of the event's organizing community. She is also responsible for bringing cycling back to the Vail Valley through the USA Pro Cycling Challenge. Please join me in welcoming Seal Fulls.
make a shift on AV. Thanks for your help on that. I'm going to give you a little warning. I tend to be kind of a winger when I speak. I just kind of run with it. But my team, my VP of Communications and the head of marketing, they got nervous because they know you guys are all smart, and they know Governor Lamb is genius. So they said, no, go with the script, use real facts. So I'm going to have to do something that's a little bit different for me, which I'll be working off of the script a little bit more for you, but also winging it to find that combination of that. I do just want us to say, I'm a huge fan of Governor Lamb. I love what he said. This is going to be a little bit of a departure from where he just said, because we're going to be talking about events. And a lot of that is going to go counterintuitive with some of the different things that were just up with us. So, excellent. So we're there. Thanks so much. Can you guys hear me okay? So to start with, Governor Lamb is a graduate of Wisconsin, as am I. But as you heard, he's from Madison, which is where in Wisconsin all the intellectuals go. And I'm from La Crosse, which is where all the jocks go. So that's really going to give you a good sense of where we're going on this talk as well. I was a recreation major. Even today, my dad is like, really? There's a degree called recreation? You got to be kidding me. He used to always mock me, said, when's that underwater basket weaving class going to come into play for you? And yet it's kind of stood me in pretty good stead. So one of the reasons for that is that after I graduated, I came out here, and I came to Colorado from Chicago for the same reason that 2/3 of the people who live in this state came here for. We came here because we love the mountains, we love the open space, clean water, clean air. We like the freedom that Colorado really represents to all of us. I'm fortunate that in my job, half the time that I'm enjoying all those things, I'm actually working. That's really what events do in Colorado. We are outdoors. We're enjoying the very things that brought us here. But I also want to talk to you tonight about a couple of other things, and it's really finding the balance in what we do. So when we talk about events, when we talk about Colorado and the importance of economic impact, the environment, population, all those things really come down to one thing. It really is about balance. Not one thing will ever survive without the other. In nature, there's balance in nature. There's balance in our lives and the human body. Everything about life is balance. One of the vehicles that we use to share the beauty of Colorado, not just through the Olympics, and we're going to talk a lot about the Olympics today, but we're also going to talk about sport in general because Colorado is amazing for how many different sports we have. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit is the 2015 World Alpine Ski Championships. This will be the 3rd time that Vail Beaver Creek are hosting these championships, which is kind of amazing. The only other place in the world to host 3 world championships is our sister city, St. Moritz. They're bad sisters, by the way. They compete against us half the time. It took them about 80 years to do that. In Vail Beaver Creek, we did it in just 24 years. So we're pretty proud of that. Now, the reason I bring that up is because as much as we're going to talk about the Olympics, in the athlete's life, almost everywhere in the world, a World Championships medal is as valuable as an Olympic medal. The actual piece of World Championships, it's everything you see at the Olympics, everything in alpine skiing that's at the Olympics, that's the World Championships. The same sports, the same athletes, the same countries, the same media. The television even is really pretty similar. So it's a big deal. And what's great about it is it's here. And so as much as we'll talk about the Olympics and can we get them and should we have had them, the fact is that this is pretty happening quite often in Colorado where we have major events like a World Championships that's here with us. So I wanted to give you that reference points just so you understood that we have this opportunity all the time to share our state with people around the world. And as a tourism-driven state, it's important for us to be able to do that. So I actually want to share with you first one of the most iconic Olympic moments ever. And I think we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way than we'd planned. So.
Downhill is danger. Comes at a
So guys, what I'm going to show you is the clip of
sports hero.
John Palmer in the 1970s.
5 times.
Number 15, the greatest downhiller, many people say, of all time.
Well, Frankie knows what he has to do because most of the tough competition has already gone ahead of him. He's the last man in the first seating group of 15. He knows Brucey is in first place. He knows what he has to do. You can be sure with all the pressure that's riding on his shoulders that he has trouble right there. Trouble by Palmer right on the top. Trouble at the end, Frank. He's right on the edge.
And he's right on the edge, and there's that intermediate time, and he's just 2/100ths of a second behind Rusi.
And even with those mistakes, Hans Palmer, though, has a tendency to really come on strong at the bottom of the downhill. But the pressure on him is tremendous. Bernard Rusi sitting at the bottom of first place. Clammer almost went down, Frank.
Roger said he's on the edge. Believe me, he is on the edge of disaster. And he knows what he has to do. Look at him fly.
So remember one thing, he's carrying a lot of speed down that mountain. We saw him almost go into the nets, but he's still going.
His intermediate time now will appear on the right. Lucy's will be on the left as we pick up that second intermediate time. The Austrian fans at the bottom of the hill are going crazy.
And Franz Clammer certainly cannot be accused of doing anything but attacking. Look at him go for it.
And he's still hundredths of a second behind Russi. He has got to let it go.
He's all over this mountain. 2 tenths he has to make up on the lower part of the mountain. Franz Clammer is really going to have to move if he's going to catch Russi. He's almost out of the hay bales.
And into the bare turn. He'll go over the Johannes Pass, and then he'll head for home. You'll see Russi's time come up on the left. Clammer's on the right.
He's going to have to do it right down here. Come on, Frank. Here he comes. A lot more air.
This is it. This is for the gold medal.
Franz Clammer is really going to have to pull it out. Look at him get in that truck.
Russi's time on the left. Clammer on the right. Clammer has done it. This crowd has gone crazy. Franz Clammer has overtaken Bernard Russi. An incredible race.
I love that. When that happened, I was a sophomore in high school. I've dated myself, I know. Well, I haven't dated myself, but I've told you how old I am now. And I didn't even care about ski racing. I'd never skied in my life. I didn't care about ski racing. I didn't really even know what a pair of boots, bindings, or skis looked like, quite honestly. And yet, I went home, I watched that, and I wrote my first and only fan letter I've ever written in my life to Franz Clammer. What's ironic about that is Franz is actually now a friend, and he mocks me about that, quite honestly. But that is why we talk about the Olympics, and that's why we talk about sport. That's life-altering. And quite honestly, we were talking about this earlier when somebody knew that I was having this. They go, I love that run. That changed my life. That changed a lot of people's lives. That actually changed an entire industry. The growth of skiers grew in that year from 1976 to 1978. All of them call it the Clammer kick. It grew more in that 2-year period than it ever has in the history of the sport. Clammer, right there. That's amazing, isn't it? And to me, that really is a huge piece about sport. Not only that you see that everyone in the world saw that and experienced that, but that we felt something. Did you guys feel something when Clammer was all over the place? You should. He did, I'm pretty sure, and everybody else did. So I want you to feel that, because I think that's so important. But one of the things we want to talk about is how do we get from what Governor Lamb was talking about, 1972, 1976 to today, because it's a different world. Everything about it is different. This was Vail in 1973. You don't see that scene all too often, or that one. That's President Ford. You don't see those ski pants too often. Maybe you do now. Maybe you do now again. They're probably back, aren't they? And that was what downtown Vail looked like. Far fewer than 1,000 people lived in Vail. Beaver Creek wasn't even created yet. As a matter of fact, there it is. This is a map of Beaver Creek. That's the founder of Vail and Beaver Creek, and those are actually the staff that the International Olympic Committee had picked to help run the ski races for the 1976 Olympics. It's a great photo. It's rare, I think. So that's really where we were. There was no Beaver Creek. There were no ski runs. There was no employee housing, but ironically, when I moved to Avon, Colorado, I lived right off the bat where the athlete housing was to have been in the Benchmark condos in Avon. So I feel very connected to those Olympics. But it's a different place, and the Olympics are a different thing as well. I really think that the concerns the governor had about the Olympics, I think they were real, and I think they were legitimate. There was a constant brown cloud, as he mentioned before, hanging over Denver. The population explosion, and those who were in Colorado for the peace and tranquility were seeing it slip away, and an Olympics was going to turn that slip into a slide. And I think that's true. I think people felt that. The Olympics were a different animal then, too. There was no big television contract. There really weren't a lot of corporate partners there as well, and so there really was an enormous financial risk that every single place took that was going to bid for it. In fact, it wasn't really all that popular to bid for them. I love the fact that in 1980, Lake Placid, that was the only candidate for the Olympics. That's why they won it. 1984, the Los Angeles Olympics, nobody else bid. It's a different world today, but back then, it was an expensive piece. There wasn't a lot of funding in place for it, and it was tricky. This is Denver today. I would think that the fact that nearly all of Governor Lamb's concerns probably still happened. The Colorado of today is a much more urban-based community. Our growth is significant. The environment, it kind of lies in peril every day to population growth and everything else that's going to happen, the pressures. We're turning down the Olympics also left Colorado with a tainted image within the international sports world. Even the most recent effort that some of the different Denver people, and actually we were part of that, took in looking at should we bid for another Olympics, the very first question was, have we been forgiven? Honestly, have we been forgiven by the international world? And the answer was, maybe. Now, the good news is the members of the IOC are really pretty old, and the guys who were here in '76, not that many are still around. So as they go, our chances get better every day. Those are the Olympics of 40 years ago. These are the Olympics of today. They've changed for better and for worse. They've become a far more attractive enterprise for a country to host, a far more expensive one. The international marketing reach is 100 times that which it was in 1976, but it also has a harder time finding its way through the niche of media. Just a few of the changes that the Olympic movement has made, and I think they've improved the brand of the prospect, and I think they make looking at the Olympics a more valuable effort than they would have in 1976. And actually, the 1976 Olympics ushered in some of those things. The very first one is, you bid for the Olympics, you already have to demonstrate that you have your government's support for financial backing. Number one thing, all of that happened because of 1976. In 1984, the Los Angeles Olympics, they changed the game forever. They said, we can't afford to lose money. We can't afford to build new buildings and new structures for every single thing that's going to happen. So instead, we're going to work on television rights fees. We're going to do a public-private partnership. We're going to bring in corporate partners into place. And honestly, we're going to be very miserly in how we run this budget. We're going to use and recondition our existing structures rather than build new ones. And what happened? It was a huge success. They made money. It didn't do any of the damage that people always worry an Olympics is going to do. It was a huge turning point for the Olympics. After that, the IOC started giving greater value to candidates who were going to be using existing structures. In 1972, at the time of the discussion, the decision against holding the '76 Olympics, there was very little discussion about the environment. And that really changed in 1992 when Albertville, France hosted the Winter Olympics. It's in the Savoy region of France, and if you've been there, most of France is really pretty nice. The Savoy area is very, very nice. And what happened with those Olympics was really horrible. All of those things, when you saw the bobsled, the luge, the ski jumping, every single structure, every single sport was going to be built a brand new facility, everything brand new. It just damaged and changed forever, really, that entire region. They actually had one thing, the bobsled, and they use this anyway, it's liquid. Ammonia is used for cooling because they can't guarantee that they're going to have cold temperatures. Usually it's done a little safer. But Albertville made great news when they gave gas masks to all the residents located near the bobsled. And so what happened is there was a cry, and it actually goes a little bit back to what Governor Lamb was saying. People stopped, and they said, hold it, there's something going on here. So out of that bad came good. The International Olympic Committee, they acknowledged that they have a responsibility to terms of promoting sustainable development, and they regard the development now as the third dimension of Olympianism, next to sport and culture. And that actually led to a whole commission of sport and environment, which now is a part of the Olympic movement. So again, horrible thing that happened, it helped make change to a sport. I love this quote. Anybody know who said this? It's Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela said it so that when South Africa bid to host the FIFA World Cup of Soccer, he really wanted them to do it. And he really believed that this is the reason to do sport. I think that's fascinating. This is one of our events, but this really, it has a reason. I'm going to talk about DNA, and now I'm nervous about that after we talked about really the overpopulation side of that. But there is a truth about Colorado. The quote you just saw, that's really true about Colorado, and I think it's because it's in the DNA of the people who live here, both who were born here and who moved here. There's something about us that brought us here. Per capita, Colorado is the #1 state for holding international major events year in and year out. I think it's amazing. There's a reason for that. It's all of us. We came here, we live here, this is how we go. Governor Lamb actually had a quote, which I also love. He dubbed this state once the geography of hope. And I think he was right, and here's why. Here are some facts that we know about ourselves as Coloradans. We're the fittest state. Now, the sad thing is we're the fittest state, and we're the only state that has an obesity of less than 20%. That's a whole other discussion, I know. Kind of sad, isn't it? But we are the fittest state. We're also the third youngest state. Our median age is 32.5 years. Nearly 2/3 of our residents weren't even born here, like myself. Colorado's tend to huddle, this is crazy, in urban areas. 85% of the people of this state, they really live in that mass area of Pueblo to Fort Collins, the urban corridor. 91% of Colorado adults have a high school degree, and 1/3 hold a college degree. Only Washington, D.C. is an area that has more residents with college degrees than Colorado. The median income for Colorado is also above the national average. We're at $57,000. And in 1994, but again in 2004, we were voted the most physically active people in the country. Colorado, and this is a critical fact I want you to remember, we lead the country in microbrew consumption. Exactly, and let's all go do that now. So there's a reason that I think that that's important, and that is because it perfectly matches the demographics of people who go to sports events. If you layer one on top of the other one, we're almost identical, and especially the beer one. That's why that's so critical, because then we wouldn't have matched if we didn't have that in there. So I think that that's a great piece of that, is that we're made for events here. But I think there's 5 reasons that events are important to us, Olympics and otherwise. First one is economic impact. Tourism is the #2 economic driver in Colorado behind agriculture. Tourism comes from our ski resorts, our outdoor hunting, all those things that bring the people here, why we love it. $9.4 billion every year is brought into our state from outside of people who are coming here to participate in recreation and tourism. 2.2 million people came here for an event, not for any other reason, for a specific event last year. Looking at several of the major events we have today, the economic impact is substantial. If I use the '99 World Championships, we did our own economic impact study, as everybody does. We had about $100 million in 1999. The plan and the expectation for 2015 is about $160 million. If you look at other events, the U.S. Pro Cycling comes through Vail. It's in Colorado, 7 days. In 7 days, 99.6 direct economic impact for the state. I love this. Our #1, too, is international marketing. We really depend on this. We utilize our events to spread the word of Colorado for lots of different reasons, mostly because, '2, we're a tourism-driven state. The more we can get out the message through events, which tends to be a less expensive way for us to do it, the better. In 1999 again, or in 1989, Vail had 3% of its guests were from anywhere other than Colorado, quite honestly, or the United States. The year after those championships, it jumped to 12%. That's an unbelievable growth. In 2002, the ski resorts of Utah, in the years since that, they've had 42% growth, and their international guest has gone by 200% from the Olympics. Even if you look at just the ways that we get out there, how many people get to see Colorado, again, the U.S. Pro Cycling Challenge, 180 countries see that live. It's huge. Our expected value of contact points. Every time somebody sees the World Championships in 2015, the value of that, 2.5 billion in marketing impressions. The X Games, $10 million into Aspen over 3 days. You might not think that's a big deal because some of those guys can drop $10 million all by themselves, I know, but still, if you're a retailer there, that was a big number. Quality of life. We're all here for a reason. We want to be outdoors, and yet at the same time, we tend to huddle in urban areas. So the truth of it is, Coloradans, they love to be a part of activity. As much as we think we want peace and quiet, and we do, we also want the mix of things, and that's part of our quality. Community improvements is a huge piece, and especially when you look at Olympics and an Olympic site, that's a big area they'll look at, is what are the things that we can do for our community with the dollars that will come in from other events. I was just at the World Championships in Austria, tiny little town, Schladming. It's about half the size of Vail, which is hard to believe, I know. That little tiny town, by hosting the World Championships, big event, 50,000 people every day in that little town, the country of Austria gave them $180 million to do improvements in their community. Imagine that. That's a tiny little place. $180 million. The improvements that Schladming, Austria is able to make because of those World Championships will really further their community for the next 20, 30 years. If you think about Salt Lake City, if you've been there, their roads are impeccable. They improved all of those because of the Olympics. They got all those from federal funding. Some of that would have happened anyway, just moved it ahead forward. Still allowed them to be able to improve themselves. If we look ahead at an Olympic bid here, certainly as the bids have looked, they've said, we think I-70 will suffice for Olympic bid, and I know all the tests have come back on that, but at the same time, that's always a dream, is could we actually create a mass transit opportunity up in the mountains and eliminate all the cars? That'd be great. The fifth one is it builds international bridges, and it can be Olympics, it can be World Championships, it can be really almost any event, and I'm a huge fan of this. I have a great story for you. In 2001, and actually not just 2001, but September 11th, 2001, I was in our International Press Center of the international World Cycling Championships, mountain biking. And when the towers were hit, I was there with representatives of 50 different countries. They'd all been coming over the last couple of days. We were to have our opening ceremonies and beginning our competition that day. Can you imagine that? Sharing that horrible, horrible thing that happened to all of us as Americans and sharing it with people from all over the world. And they shared with us. I was never felt so supported as I did that day. And every time I go to an event, I feel that. I remember that feeling because we were there for sport, but we were there because we all had that common peace. And I feel that all the time. That rest of that week, we're really torn. Should we keep doing the event or not doing the event? Everybody voted, quite honestly, and we did. This photo, Allison Neff, she's a great rider here. She won, and that was the first thing she did. It's almost missed. She had the American flag over her, and we had the American flag. People from every country were carrying American flags. It really was an unbelievably moving piece, and honestly, it carried for me forever, and I know other people who have been there. That just reminded them of the power of sport, and I think that's so important. So going forward, there's drawbacks to events, and I don't want to pretend like there's not, because there are, so let's cover some of those. I could spend about 20 minutes just talking about all the damages that events and major events and Olympics bankrupted and all kinds of things, and we know that. But I'd also say we've learned from that, and I think that that brings with it the great pieces out of that. I love the saying that there's a reason that the rearview mirror is so much smaller than the windshield. The past is the past, and we need to be able to look forward as well. So what are those drawbacks, and what have we learned from them? So we'll start with money. There's a long history of communities, states, and countries that have been nearly bankrupted in the name of an event. In particular, the Olympic Games has a particularly bad name for that. But it's important to know that in addition to reviving their city or providing needed infrastructure, Los Angeles, Seoul, Barcelona, Atlanta, Salt Lake, Beijing, all of them recognize a net surplus on their Olympics. And then there's others that actually lost money, but they still met their budget. They had an expectation that they'd lose money, but they were willing to do it because of the other benefits. And then still others that are still paying off their debt. I'm pretty sure Montreal is probably still paying off their debt from 1976. But I think that tells us a good story. It tells us that it's not the Olympics that make us broke. It's the choices that we make within that. The fact that there are winners and losers says that it's not the event, it's the organizer. And I think that that's a key critical thing for us to know that. If you look at major events on a smaller scale, like the World Championships or any of the other things I've talked about, US Pro Cycling, the GoPro Mountain Games, X Games, the organizer doesn't have a backstop. Ooh, sorry about that. Oh, look at, I've moved to a great slide. I don't want to go there yet, you guys. Anyway, you'll love this. In a smaller event, though, you don't have that backstop. You have to fund that yourself. So for us, for example, the World Championships, $58 million, that's us. You know, we don't have, the state of Colorado is not going to bail us out if we don't do a good job of running that. So I think that that's a really good one to know. The area of question for most of you guys is going to be about the environment. And I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it's important. We've learned so much about the environment, of course, but we also have an opportunity to do a better job for the environment through sport. If you think about how many people will go along the side of a ski hill, or if you're familiar with cycling, when they have the King of the Mountain point, it's the highest point on that ride. Almost always it's in a beautiful, semi-pristine place with a road going through it. But they're huge crowds. How do you do that? How do you do an event and say that it doesn't have an environmental impact? It does. But how do we use the events then to battle bad with good? I think that's critical. So one of the things I want to talk about here is 13% of the United States pay attention to science. You come out with science, the great reports, only 13% are paying attention to them. 61% of people pay attention to what happens in sports. How many of you guys know that Lindsey Vonn is dating Tiger Woods? Sort of. Or you just read People magazine, it could be that as well. I think that that gives us an opportunity through sport to actually share the message in a way that you won't be able to get through a more natural method. This picture was in Schladming, where beer really is king, starts at 4 a.m. and ends at 4 a.m. And this is Brian Nolan. He's actually a very respected individual in Val Valley. He's on our school board and he owns a lot of restaurants. Here's the reason I wanted to show you that, is this is an impact of sport. The cup he's holding is reusable, not recyclable, reusable. They literally would wash it and use it for the next customer. You couldn't buy anything in the stadium where you didn't get that cup and you paid €3, like $4.50, as a deposit for that cup. And when you brought it back, you got your deposit back. 50,000 people, half of them drunk. How many cups do you think were on the ground? None. And I know because we're a nonprofit. €3 to us is a lot of money. We went down there, we're looking for cups, there's none because people returned them. So what did they do? Not only did they find a way to reuse cups, but they found a way to also eliminate trash. And for me, it imprinted on us forever. So Brian would say that that's a 4-pack. That's why we took that picture. I've never seen that, a 4-pack beer carrier. So right there, he had about €12, returned them all, and somebody used them again the next day. I love that. But for us, that was a great message. We just had another one. We just had an event in Vail where Vail actually has very stringent codes on how you recycle, how you compost, and landfill. And as a part of that, they've created some pretty hideous garbage cans, especially when you have a fairly high-end event in the garbage cans, and they say, this is compostable, this goes to landfill, and this is recycling. But what was happening is people didn't know what was. They would stand there with all of their trash and go, I don't know, is that compostable, is that not? So we did something, we made the hideous garbage cans even more hideous. We took examples. This is what is compostable. Here's the bowls, here's the plates. This is what landfill is. Literally, we had a grilled cheese sandwich on top of it. And here's what goes to landfill. It was fascinating. And people stood there, and you could see them having to go through the process of what goes where. Do you think that now they don't know? That every time they had to throw something away, every time they ate, they had to go back through that practice, and on one hand, it was a hassle. On the other hand, it was a huge, huge educational opportunity for thousands of people who never care or think about where their things go. So remember when I was telling you before about the Albertville Olympics, and they were the least environmentally sensitive Olympics ever? Here's the great story, is that the Olympics that followed Albertville, Lillehammer, Norway, they set the bar. They were the most environmental games ever. Hosted in little tiny Lillehammer, which I love that about it, for the first time, ambitious environmental action was planned and carried out at a major sports event. This represented the start of an important and still continuing process. That really was the tipping point, Albertville to Lillehammer, and it changed. In 1999, when we held the World Championships, we're the first ones to ever do it at World Championships, our own environmental committee. Nobody told us to do it, we just wanted to do it. We wanted the environment to be key. And we had a lot of people very committed to the environment. They did fantastic things. They did one thing where they created a summit called Sustainable Summits, and they invited all of the CEOs of all the ski resorts in the United States. There are 500 of them. Thankfully, a lot of them are owned by multiple people. About 80% of them came. And for 3 days, they talked about, wow, we own a ski resort. What do we need to do? This is really one of the first times people talked about the environment. And they looked at, what are they doing? What practices can they change? And there are about 50 different things that every ski resort does now. They really started with that little tiny Sustainable Summit. It's fascinating, isn't it? And with just an event. That's where it all started from. I love this as well. When we talk about drawbacks in the environment, I think that's a key piece. That one of the big drawbacks on Olympics is that they want to build a lot. So whether it's a bobsled or luge or anything else, or even for us, right? We're building ski trails for World Championships. But I think if we don't bear in mind that we lose focus of it all, and we'll all be in a lot of trouble. So one of the things I think that is fascinating and fantastic is that everybody goes there now. There really is this whole environmental movement. At this year's Teva Mountain Games, soon to be the GoPro Mountain Games, come join us in June. All of our people, they actually came out, 1,000 people volunteered to fix trails. We just said, hey, why don't you show up if you want to come? 1,000 people. They don't even live here. They came here for a vacation, and they spent about 4 hours out in the National Forest with us, repairing some of the trails that happens from hiking and mountain biking and all the things we love to do. People have that consciousness, and if our events can help measure that along, I think that's great. This slide, the upper one, a stadium that was built and never used again. The lower one is the London Stadium just built for the Olympics. And I think that's a great story. This is really about true lasting legacies and what do we design, what do we put, why do we put them. London did a great job, I think. That stadium is located in the East End, and that really was considered to be a horrible section of London that they had really wanted to redo for a long time. By building the stadium there, it allowed them to really begin that economic development of that area. In particular, in the old days, an Olympic bidder would envision building big new grand places for each of the elements of the games, and these spaces would never be used again. They'd create an eyesore over time, as you can see, a financial burden for cities, and then you'd have a hard time finding a way to use them. They were a waste of resources. So the story of the '76 Olympics is really based on this point. If you don't have the vision shared with your community of what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, you're going to screw up. And honestly, I think that's true. And I think that's really what happened in '76. It wasn't really a shared vision. If we don't go there to start with, we're all going to be in a little bit of trouble. When we decided to do the World Championships, we sat down with everybody. We sat down with our partner, Vail Resorts, with the local governments, with the people in there and said, is this a good idea or not? And the fact is, everyone liked it. And the fact is, now everybody's on board with that as well. So I think when we talk about that, we talk about all the building that's going to go on. If we haven't already identified what our goals are, what do we want to do, and everybody's not shared in that, you're going to have waste like that above. But if you really think through it, you're going to have a success like that. Now, it just happened last year. Maybe it turns out not to be a success, but I bet it will, because they really did a great job of thinking through that. So I do want to talk a little bit about 2015 as we start wrapping up. I think we did a lot of things right on 2015. We've got 2 years to know if we did or not, and I'll come back in 2 years and tell you, or you'll tell me if we did or not. The first thing that we did is we really made a decision with everybody. We talked about that a little bit. We also said we want to be really environmental. This building, it actually looks much nicer than that. This is our Timey building that we built in '99, and it was in the wrong place. We had to move our stadium over a little bit. So rather than tear it down, we said we'll move it. And we actually got everybody kind of pitched in, and we just moved it to the other side of the stadium. We're not building a new one. We've got to expand it a little bit, but we'll be able to do that less expensively and much more environmentally sensitive than we would be able to do it another way. In addition, because we'd run the World Championships before, we had a pretty good sense of the cost implications of an event of that magnitude. For $58 million, I think this is a great story. 40 million of that comes from outside of this country. So it's 40 million of cash infusion into our country, and really for us, into our state and into our community. Sorry about that, guys. I think that's an important thing, because when you talk about whether it's Olympics or anything else, where's the money coming from, where's it going? For us, we know that most of our money has come from public-private. Again, almost none of it is government-related, and yet our benefits will all be coming back into our community, so we like that idea. We have a really strong environmental message and method. As a matter of fact, we have 7 goals that we set when we ran and won the championship, 7. Out of those, 3 of them are environmental goals. That's crazy in some ways, but we like that. We built a very, very strong environmental committee that sits at the table, is as important to us as our race committee or our finance committee. We actually have some really great goals. We have a terrific partner, Vail Resorts. They have the largest ski area recycling program in the world. So what a great opportunity for us to be able to share that with the world. We have our environmental committee has got a couple of things. One of them is that we're going to be paperless for the championships. As I'm reading all my paper, I was like, I can't believe I did that. Our goal really is that we'll be using technology, and our goal is to really not have any paper, not print brochures, not print maps. Go online, grab them from there. And we think that that'd be a great way to demonstrate that as well. We're also committed to using local materials, local partners, as little shipping as possible as we can do. And we really think probably the most important thing for us, because we live in the middle of a national forest, quite honestly, is to use the championships to educate the world, our community, our state, our country, on the importance of natural resources and the value of our public lands. Not going to get any more of those. That is what it is. So moving forward, the future of Denver Olympics. I'm really not the right person. I've been involved in some of the bids leading up to this, and I'm pretty up to speed on it, but still a lot of moving pieces that you guys are living in the heart of it, with the USOC housed right here. What would a Colorado Olympics look like in the future? First, the timeline of when an Olympics bid is even possible. The USOC is currently looking at their pool of candidates for the summer of 2024. They just reached out to 35 different potential candidates for that, I think just a couple weeks ago. And I think they're going to wait to see what comes of that. And 26, which is a Winter Games, will depend on what happens of 24. What would a Denver bid look like? The 2018 and 2022 group that had been working on that, they really identified a desire to work along the I-70 corridor, to limit new construction and to utilize existing facilities whenever possible. All smart. The good news, Denver and the resorts have a lot of existing great facilities already in place. The better news is that the environment is at the forefront of every discussion. If you think about even with the World Championships, we've just built our last course. It's the women's downhill course. It's a great story as well, by the way. It's judged by the women to be the hardest women's course in the world. We love that. Our Birds of Prey men's course, second hardest. But the great news about the women's course is we barely cut any trees. We barely moved any dirt. We kind of were able to look at the hill and say, where can we get a really hard course? And all we had to do is patch together 3 existing courses, cut one little section, and just through being able to look at it that creative way, we had the most minimal construction, or destruction, I should say, of any mountain for any course. And it's going to be the best women's course in the world. The women were just on it last week. It's phenomenal. So I think that's a great story to tell. So I want to close with this. I love this little girl. I've used her 1,000 times. I should be paying her royalty fees probably. But this really is the tune for us in 2015. It is about the future for us. It is about kids and the youth. To be certain, the decision that Denver made in 1976 was really a catalyst for change in how cities view the Olympics in how the Olympics should operate within our state and how major decisions that will have a direct impact on its residents should be made. From that decision, Colorado has grown in ways both good and bad. We will forever be known as the city that turned back the Olympics to the IOC. We're it. Nobody else has done that. But I kind of like that thought, and I like the idea that the same state that did that is now a state that has such big events and that is willing to still think about having an Olympics. Here we are, years later, a major location of hosting big-time international sports and mulling over the opportunity to bid for the Olympics again. So will events like the 2015 World Alpine Ski Championships usher in a new Olympics Games opportunity? Have we turned the corner on environmental negligence to environmental stewardship? I don't know, but I think, again, to Governor Lamb's own words, Colorado is the geography of hope, and we can hope. So thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Seal, and thanks to all of our presenters, our students, Governor Lamb, Ms. Foles. I want to thank all of you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at next year's State of the Rockies Conference. Good night.